Father of the bride disobeys her no surprise rule and does just the opposite. Every year, over 2 million weddings are performed in the US. That's a really huge number. And since there are so many weddings going on, most people want to make their ceremony unique and memorable. Planning a wedding is never easy, and one bride found this out while she was organizing her special day. When the happy day finally came, she was worried something unplanned would happen. However, her father made sure that his daughter got a surprise she'd never forget. We brought a surprise guest to the wedding, and it was somebody nobody expected. Meet the bride. Our story begins with a young woman called Kristen. When she was a kid, her days were filled with magical moments and wonderment. The girl was born into an amazing family. She had unconditional love and support from her parents, who always celebrated her successes. Kristen never had a doubt in her mind that her mom and dad would always be there for her to help her turn her dreams into a reality. She grew up knowing she was the luckiest girl in the world. The happy couple. Kristen knew she met the love of her life when she met a man by the name of Chris. Even though they met randomly in 2014, it was practically love at first sight. The two of them quickly realized that they had a lot in common. Chris believed that Kristen was the most beautiful woman in the world, and he didn't want to let her get away after just a few hours of conversation. He knew he wanted to see her again. Arranging a date. After their conversation had finished, Chris gathered all his courage and asked Kristen on a date. Kristen liked Chris just as much as he liked her, so she gladly agreed to see him again. The two of them went on their first official date just a few days later. They had amazing chemistry and hit it off immediately. Chris always knew how to make Kristen laugh, and in turn, her smile made him feel like he was floating on air. A handful of dates. Since their first date was such a success, they went on many more. The pair always had a great time with each other. When they were apart, they just counted the days until their next date. The years flew by before they knew it. To them, it seemed like they'd only met yesterday, but everyone around them could see that they were on the track to living the rest of their lives together. At this time, Chris started thinking about proposing to his beautiful girlfriend. The proposal. Chris loved his girl, and he knew he wanted her to be in his life forever. That's why he decided to buy her a beautiful ring. And when the time was right, he got down on one knee. Kristen was over the moon when Chris popped the question. She said yes without a second thought, and the wedding planning started soon. Disney magic. When she was a little girl, Kristen always dreamed about her perfect wedding. She imagined she would have a wedding just like from a Disney movie, since those movies were always her favorite. Kristen loved Disney movies ever since she could remember. When she'd watch them, she would imagine she was the princess shown on the screen. Now that she was all grown up, she was lucky enough to find her Prince Charming. The exciting news. One thing the newly engaged couple wanted to do was share the exciting news with their loved ones. Both Kristen and Chris called their families right away to tell them they'd be getting married. Kristen was always very close to her parents, especially with her father. She was always Daddy's little girl, and she just couldn't wait to tell him she was marrying the man of her dreams. Her parents were naturally very happy. Planning the wedding. Planning a wedding is always stressful. The couple was aware that they had a hard few months and a large number of tasks ahead of them. They were determined to plan the perfect wedding. They had to make a lot of hard decisions over the next year or so, including food, colors, and venue. However, the couple was so excited about getting married, they didn't mind putting in the hard work. The dream dress. While Kristen was planning her wedding, she felt like she was a real-life Disney princess. One of the moments that made her feel like that was buying her wedding dress. She asked for the biggest and most beautiful dress, and when she tried it on, she was ecstatic. This dress was full of sparkles, and she admired it as she twirled in front of the mirror. She kept thinking about how this dress looked exactly like something a Disney princess would wear, and how her Prince Charming would be impressed. A little help from your family. The couple's families wanted to do anything to help, so they offered their financial help. They also wanted to help with the guest list. Kristen and Chris weren't one of those couples who wanted a small and personal wedding. They wanted to celebrate their love with all their family and friends, so they invited all their family and friends. For everything to go according to plan, they needed a big venue. Finding the perfect place. The couple needed a really big venue since they had a huge guest list, so they had to do some research. They needed everyone to be happy and comfortable during the ceremony after all. They searched high and low trying to find the perfect place. And eventually, all their hard work paid off. The couple managed to find a beachside resort that would be able to fit all their guests. The resort was called the Icona Gold Inn, and it was located in Avalon, New Jersey. The venue. Kristen always dreamed of getting married on the beach. Since this venue offered that option, it was the perfect place for the couple. The couple had their pick of reception rooms, as the building had a fair few of them. Most of them had breathtaking views of the beach, delicious seafood menus, and amazing overnight accommodations. Kristen and Chris knew their guests would be impressed. Everything was coming together. The happy couple couldn't wait for their big day. They booked the beachfront for their ceremony and the grand hall with a large patio for the reception. The pair believed that they could finally relax now that the venue was booked. All the small details, such as food and decorations, were also coming together. So they believed they had control over every little detail. They didn't even suspect something unplanned would happen at their wedding. Avoiding surprises. Ever since she was a little girl, Kristen loved to be organized and in control of everything. This applied to her wedding as well. The future bride had only one request when it came to planning. Kristen told her friends and family that she didn't want any sort of surprise during her big day. She wanted to know everything that would be going on so she could say if it was okay with her. She wanted to avoid being nervous about unplanned surprises. She wanted to be in complete control. Who would take part in the ceremony? Kristen's family promised her there would be no surprises, as they wanted their daughter's wedding to be perfect. Kristen found the thought of having complete control over her wedding calming. The bride and groom also had to discuss who they wanted to take part in the wedding. Did they want someone to give a speech during the ceremony? Should their guests play games that would result in the two of them kissing? The bride was happy all the planning was in her hands. Or so she thought. Who would speak at the wedding? Since there are no strict rules about who speaks at weddings, the couple could give this honor to anyone. The best man and maid of honor were naturally set to give speeches, as well as the happy couple. However, sometimes parents of the newlyweds give speeches as well. But Kristen and Chris had no idea if any of their parents even wanted to speak in front of such a large crowd. They asked their parents. Both Kristen and Chris asked their parents if they wanted to speak at the wedding. All they wanted to know was if they should make some time in the schedule for them to say a few words. Kristen was very excited when her father said he would love to speak at the wedding. In fact, he seemed very excited about having some time on the microphone. The bride was very happy about his response. She was glad her father wanted to take part in her special day. It was getting serious. Planning continued on during the next few weeks. Kristen and Chris mostly forgot about the planned speeches since that part of the ceremony was already organized. However, they couldn't completely forget about the speeches, as Kristen's father kept mentioning them. He kept reminding his daughter and his fiancé that he'd need a few minutes to speak before the first dance. They had no idea why he was so adamant about it. Behaving weirdly. Kristen thought her dad was behaving somewhat strangely. Why was he so concerned about the time he was supposed to speak? At first, she thought it was funny, but she started getting worried after some time. Kristen told her dad there was no need for him to worry since everything was already planned out. He told his daughter that he was just excited about the upcoming big day and wanted it to be perfect. Kristen was happy because her dad was so thrilled. Was something off? When Kristen's dad wouldn't stop reminding her about his speech, the bride-to-be made sure to remind her dad about the promise he made about no surprises. She just couldn't shake the feeling that her dad was planning a surprise behind her back. He reassured her that there was no reason to worry and that she would be very happy with his speech. Since there was nothing else she could do, she decided to just let it go. It was probably just nerves. It was too much for Kristen to think about why her dad was behaving strongly, since she too had many things to think about anyway. She decided it was probably just nerves. Since Kristen had always been Daddy's little girl, it wasn't strange that he was ready to do anything to make her big day perfect. So when his daughter got engaged, he started thinking about what he could do to make her wedding day a day Kristen would never forget. Kristen's childhood. When she was a kid, Kristen always had her dad's unconditional support. It didn't matter to him if she wanted to spend her days playing a sport or watching Disney princess movies. He was there to support her. Even though Kristen was now a full-grown, independent woman, she still wanted to look like a princess when she walked down the aisle in her big, beautiful dress. Her dad couldn't wait to walk his princess down the aisle, but he wanted to give her something more. A special surprise. Even though Kristen specifically said she didn't want any surprises, her dad still wanted to make her day more special than she could have ever imagined. He felt that his daughter's wedding, even though it was carefully planned out, was too similar to every other wedding in the world. He believed his daughter was special, so she deserved something that was as unique as she was for her big day. Getting the perfect idea. Kristen's dad was having trouble thinking of the perfect surprise that would be good enough for his little girl. He also needed to keep the rest of the family from interfering in his plans. He didn't want it to be too obvious that he was planning something big. However, since he was struggling with coming up with the perfect idea, he decided to go online and search for inspiration there. After all, the internet is always full of ideas. Singing a song. He found one video where a father decided to surprise his daughter with a song. This wasn't a regular song, it was one he performed himself. When the bride's father took the microphone and the music started playing, she realized what was going on. The bride approached her father with tears in her eyes and stood next to him as he sang to her. It was a touching and memorable moment. Performing a trick. Even though Kristen's dad was excited about speaking on the microphone, he was still nervous. He found inspiration in a different video as well. In a different video, a father learned how to play the guitar and surprised his daughter with that. He played an emotional song with the wedding band, which he spent weeks learning. His daughter was speechless and overcome with emotions. The theme of music. There were a lot of loving fathers out there who wanted to surprise their children on their wedding days. However, Kristen's dad wanted his surprise to be unforgettable. It seemed that most wedding surprises had one thing in common: music. He thought that maybe he should stick to that theme as well. However, it couldn't be just some regular old song. He needed something that would hit home with his daughter. A personalized gift. Kristen's dad noticed that all the gifts were specialized for the bride they were aimed at. All of these women were moved because these gifts were special to them for various reasons. Then he started thinking about Kristen's childhood and how he could incorporate it into his gift. He thought about all the things she used to love as a little girl and still love to this day. He thought that if he managed to connect her favorite thing in the world with the surprise, it would be perfect. The Disney lover. One of Kristen's favorite things from her childhood were Disney movies, especially the ones with princesses. She was still a huge Disney fan. She even went to the theater to watch the newest movies. Kristen's dad was ecstatic over the idea of making his surprise related to Disney. He knew what was his daughter's absolute favorite movie, but he didn't know how to incorporate it into her special day. The Little Mermaid. Kristen loved Disney movies as a little girl, and she watched each one more than 10 times. However, there was one movie in particular that Kristen would watch over and over again. That film was The Little Mermaid. It was Kristen's all-time favorite movie, and she had a special place for it in her heart. Her dad finally remembered the times when she would pretend she was a mermaid in pools and sing the lyrics of every song. He had a vague plan. The man knew he had a great idea, but he wasn't sure where he'd go with it. His first thought was to organize an ocean-themed wedding that would impress his daughter. It would have been easy to do, since the ceremony would already be performed on the beach. Kristen's dad went back online and decided to find out everything he could about the movie. He wanted to find out who was the woman who brought Ariel to life. Jodi Benson. The voice of Ariel in The Little Mermaid was a talented woman named Jodi Benson. When the movie was released in 1989, Jodi was 28. After the movie became popular, Jodi rose to stardom. Jodi's career took off after she voiced the red-headed mermaid. She lent her voice to Ariel for a few other projects after the original movie. She was also the voice of Barbie in the animated Toy Story franchise. Jodi had a truly illustrious career, even appearing on Broadway multiple times. He had no contacts. Kristen's dad was pessimistic. He didn't have any way to contact anyone at Disney or Jodi Benson herself. Was there any way to find this information online? The father of the bride thought about what he would say to the woman if he managed to get her contact information. Maybe he could ask her to sign a copy of the movie to Kristen, or send a special message to the happy couple. A million ideas were running through his head. A great idea. Kristen's dad became more excited the more he read about Jodi. He started thinking about if there was any possible way for this woman to lend her voice to his daughter's wedding day. He knew it was a long shot, since Jodi didn't exactly give private performances. Most celebrities don't want to entertain people at small events, so this man was at a loss. Not only was this idea a long shot, he still didn't have Jodi's contact information. The big day. When her special day finally arrived, Kristen was incredibly excited. She was barely able to sleep the previous night since her wedding day had finally come. After so much careful planning and organization, it was finally there. The happy couple couldn't wait to become man and wife. All the guests arrived at the beach and the wedding was ready to begin. The weather was sunny and warm, so Kristen and Chris were more than happy. Everything was going their way. Wedding jitters. Once everything was set up and the wedding party was ready, Kristen started preparing for a big moment. She was feeling some wedding jitters, but when she saw her father waiting for her, she calmed down. She'd been looking forward to that moment ever since she was a little girl. Her dad held out his hand for Kristen to take, and she did it confidently. The father and daughter both beamed as they walked down the aisle. At the end of the aisle, Chris was waiting for his future wife at the altar. Without a problem. The entire ceremony went smoothly and without a problem. The couple was overjoyed, their guests were enjoying themselves, and everything was perfect. Kristen and Chris couldn't have been happier about how everything was going. All they wanted was to have a nice time with their friends and family and not care about anything. However, Kristen's father had a surprise up his sleeve, and his daughter didn't know anything about it. Was it a good idea? Time for the speeches. When it was time for the reception, the wedding party moved to the enclosed area. Everyone was served their food and drinks and were happy. Everything was going according to the bride's plan. For a while, Kristen didn't have any surprises, and she was happy about it. However, it all changed when it was time for her dad to give his speech. She remembered how strange he was acting and how often he mentioned this speech, so she started to get worried. His time to shine. Both the best man and maid of honor had time for their heartfelt speeches. They said typical wedding things, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. When it was time for Kristen's dad to shine, he got in front of the room, and everyone wondered what kind of emotional speech he would give. Those who knew him well believed he would also have some jokes in his speech. However, nobody expected the surprise he had prepared. The tension was rising. He started his speech with some sweet words. He thanked all the guests for coming and spoke about his beautiful daughter and how proud he was of her. He also thanked her new husband, talked about how he was a lucky boy, and doted on how well he treated Kristen. Then the man started talking about Kristen's childhood, and everyone became emotional. However, the mood was soon about to change. Kristen's favorite thing in the world. Kristen's father talked about what the bride was like when she was a little girl, and all the things she loved as a child. He even shed a few tears, but he was the only one who knew what was going to happen next. All the guests noticed something strange. He'd brought some props. When he started talking about how much Kristen loved Disney movies, he reached for those props. He proudly pulled out 2 giant gloves and put them on his hands. They weren't ordinary gloves, they were Mickey Mouse's hands. Her mom approved. Kristen's mother was different than her husband, and so she wasn't outgoing. That's why she asked him to explain what he had planned. Since she was grinning from ear to ear at her table, it was obvious that she had approved of his plan. Kristen knew something was going on. Her father kept avoiding meeting her eyes, but her mother was looking straight at her. She looked to her mother, trying to figure out what her father was up to. But there was no use. Her mother just sat there and smiled. Mickey Mouse gloves. The speech was now becoming more humorous than emotional. Kristen's father looked hilarious while he was struggling to hold the microphone while wearing those big Mickey Mouse gloves. Kristen was now becoming quite worried. She didn't have any idea what her dad was doing with those huge gloves, and she was even embarrassed. What did those gloves have to do with anything, and why was he wearing them? The bride's eyes showed confusion and even concern as she watched her father. A question. Kristen's father kept talking about her love for Disney, and it was obviously tied to the huge and ridiculous gloves he was wearing. Where was this leading? Thankfully, the bride's father was almost ready to reveal his surprise. He started walking away from the crowd, and everyone was confused. But then he turned to his daughter and said, "Oh, by the way, Kristen, what's your favorite Disney movie?" Without stopping to think, Kristen said what he already knew: The Little Mermaid. The plan was coming to fruition. Kristen's dad's plan was finally complete. After many months of planning, he just needed for Kristen to reply with The Little Mermaid, which she, of course, did. Everything was going according to his plan. Since she'd given the answer her dad wanted, Kristen was ready for the big surprise. After spending months trying to organize a surprise his daughter would always remember, he was ready to lay his cards on the table. Everyone in the room looked at him, wondering what he was up to. He walked away. Her father gave a one-word response: "Okay." After that, he just walked off the stage and headed to the hall doors, getting ready to leave. All the guests were shocked. Kristen and Chris were completely shocked and confused as they watched him walk away. They just kept sitting in their chairs in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do. Chris even tried to watch his new father-in-law, trying to figure out where he was going. What was going on? Whispers started trailing through the room as the guests and the happy couple were wondering what was going on. Kristen and Chris just sat on their chairs, wondering what was going to happen next. Kristen started looking around the room, wondering if someone knew what her dad was doing. She guessed this had something to do with his weird behavior for the past few months. She felt nervous as this was something she didn't expect. An unexpected surprise. Kristen suddenly found herself in a situation she desperately wanted to avoid. Even though she asked her family not to do any surprises at her wedding, her dad had obviously prepared one. She sat there in disbelief. How could her father not tell her he was preparing something? Still, she was also curious. Since she didn't know a surprise would occur, she never worried about something unplanned happening. She would have known this was something her father would do. Nervous anticipation. Up to this point, the wedding had gone without a single hitch. However, something was going now, and Kristen was becoming nervous and anxious. Everyone in the room was confused, and she was worried. Even though she didn't want her guests to sit there in anticipation for too long, she didn't know where her father had gone or when he'd be back. She couldn't do anything about it, though. She could just sit there and hope that the surprise wouldn't be an unpleasant one. Re-entering the room. The doors to the hall finally opened again, and Kristen anxiously looked at the doors. Her dad was re-entering the room, but this time he wasn't alone. Kristen could see that his dad was escorting someone into the wedding hall, a woman she certainly didn't invite to the wedding. Kristen definitely wouldn't allow anyone to bring an uninvited guest to her wedding. As her dad approached the stage once again, Kristen's eyes opened wide. A strange woman. Kristen couldn't believe her father would bring a woman she didn't even know to her wedding. When Kristen looked at this woman from across the room, she couldn't recognize her at all. What was going on? She turned to her mother again, and she was still smiling at her daughter. It's then when Kristen realized that her mother was in on her dad's big surprise, so she calmed down a little bit. She knew that her mother wasn't going to let her father do something crazy and ruin the wedding with a ridiculous surprise. A surprise guest. As the two of them approached the front of the room, Kristen got a better look at the strange woman. She was wearing a beautiful long purple dress, and her hair was bright red. Kristen couldn't figure out what was her father's plan. Why on earth would he bring some random woman to her wedding without even asking her? Kristen and Chris were both confused, and so were their guests. The unknown guest had a big smile on her face. Could it be? Just as her dad returned to the spotlight in the middle of the room, Kristen finally realized she actually did know who the woman was. She'd seen her face before. Could it really be her? As the woman walked to the center of the room herself, there wasn't a doubt in Kristen's mind. This woman really was who she thought. Her jaw dropped and her eyes opened wide in shock. However, judging by Chris's expression, he still didn't know what was going on. Teasing the crowd. Kristen's dad was smiling at her and teasing the crowd, who had no idea who the woman was. Guess who I found hanging out in the, well, by the sea? While Kristen was in complete shock, Chris was still confused, but he was smiling. He thought this woman was maybe a friend of Kristen's dad, or maybe she was someone important. It seemed as if there was only one person in the room who knew who this surprise guest was, and it was Kristen. Kristen was in complete shock. While Kristen's father was talking, he kept a close eye on her expression. He was waiting for the moment when his daughter would realize who he had brought to the wedding. Kristen's reaction wasn't hard to read. Her jaw dropped and her eyes were open wide. All she could do was sit there motionless, with a look of complete astonishment and shock on her face. It was the reaction her father had been hoping for. His plan was a success. Are you kidding me? Kristen couldn't keep her emotion in anymore. She turned to the two of them and shouted, "Are you kidding me?" The woman at the front of the room just smiled at the bride. Kristen then leaned over to her new husband and asked him if he knew who the woman was. Chris squinted his eyes at her, trying to figure out if there was anything about her that seemed familiar to him. He laughed and shook his head. He just didn't have any idea at all. Introducing the woman. Kristen looked around the room to see if anyone other than her knew who the woman was. However, it seemed that only the bride recognized this unexpected guest. That's when her father decided to finally introduce the woman to the rest of the crowd. He took the microphone. "For anyone who doesn't know," he said, "Jodi Benson is the voice of Ariel from The Little Mermaid." Kristen couldn't believe what was going on. Her favorite princess was actually at her wedding. Her childhood idol. Now that everybody knew who this woman was, they weren't surprised at all at Kristen's surprised reaction. After all, this woman was the person who made Kristen's childhood magical. Every child has a person who is special to them. To some, it's a Disney princess. To others, it's a superhero or maybe an athlete. Since Kristen's favorite movie as a kid was The Little Mermaid, it wasn't strange at all that she knew who this woman was. Cheers and applause erupted from the crowd as everyone finally figured out who this woman was and why it was such a big deal that she was there. Kristen was still in complete shock and didn't even know what to do. Chris was also in total disbelief. Even though he wasn't as big a fan of Disney movies as his wife, he still loved them as a kid. Those movies shaped the lives of many children, after all. All he could do is shake his head in disbelief because such a big star was at the wedding. A sweet woman. Jodi Benson just stood there, beaming with pride. She took the microphone and congratulated the bride and groom for the wedding and wished them all the happiness in the world. Kristen still couldn't believe what was going on. She had to approach the woman to see if it was really her. So she just stood up and went to Jodi to give her a big hug. Her husband stood up and smiled as well, as this was a really touching moment. A special gift. Of course, Kristen's dad didn't simply find Jodi Benson sitting by the water. In fact, he'd been working hard on that surprise for a couple months. Jodi wasn't there just to give her congratulations to the happy couple. She was actually going to sing at the wedding. Kristen's father said that Jodi had agreed to sing a song for them, and the whole hall erupted in applause and cheers. Both the bride and groom were in complete shock and couldn't contain their glee. A big hug. Kristen didn't know what she wanted to ask her father at first. How he had managed to reach out to Jodi? When did he pull this off? Her dad just approached her and gave her a big hug, smiling from ear to ear. However, there was no time for her questions now. Jodi was standing up at the very front of the stage, waiting for the happy couple to sit back down. Kristen gladly returned to her seat and waited for her magical fairy tale moment to start. Jodi's speech. Jodi addressed the entire room. She first thanked the families of the bride and groom for having her at the wedding and how it was a pleasure to share this special day with them. She went on to explain how she never sings at weddings, except if it's for a member of her own family. This would, in fact, be the first time in her life when she would sing for someone she'd never met before. The best seats in the house. Kristen finally knew the surprise her father was planning for such a long time. All she had to do now was sit back and listen to the woman she looked up to as a child sing at her wedding. The newlyweds got some extra chairs, placed them next to their own seats in the front row, and asked their parents to join them. Kristen's father was happy that he could watch his daughter's expression as she listened to her favorite Disney princess sing just for her. A magical feeling. As soon as the music started, Kristen realized which song Jodi was about to sing. In fact, it was one of her favorites. The music for the song "Part of Your World" began, and the voice actress sang. A large screen was set up in the background, which displayed this magical moment from the actual movie. Jodi's singing was timed perfectly, and it brought tears to Kristen's eyes. This was the most perfect moment she could have ever wished for. She sang along. The longer the song went on, the more Kristen became excited. She couldn't keep it in anymore, and she started to sing along with Jodi, singing the words she knew so very well. The videographers kept filming Kristen as she sang the words and used her hands in some sort of improvised choreography. She soaked up the moment and wished it would last forever, all while not taking her eyes off Jodi. Kristen's father just kept smiling at his daughter. A moving performance. The guests at the wedding had no idea that they'd be getting a moving and special performance from a celebrity. Some of the guests started to get up so they could get a closer look at Jodi. Others were getting out their phones so they could record this unique experience. Even though nobody but Kristen knew who she was at first, now everyone recognized her voice. There wasn't a person there who hadn't heard her voice at least once. The feeling of pure joy. Even though Kristen specifically asked her family for no surprises, this one was better than she could have ever wished for. Her father didn't go for a cliche like a cheesy picture or a surprise dance. He managed to bring her Little Mermaid to sing at the wedding. He managed to bring a smile to her face, despite the fact he didn't respect her wish for absolutely no surprises. A child at heart. This moment just made Kristen's best day of her life even better. Her father arranged this surprise because he fondly remembered the times when she would watch The Little Mermaid when she was a little girl. He watched his beautiful daughter soaking up every word of the song and happily singing along. He could see that she was still a child at heart, singing the words she'd memorized years ago. He couldn't be prouder, as his little girl was all grown up, but she was still a child at heart. A fairy tale ending. As Jodi was wrapping up the song, she had a huge smile on her face. The whole crowd broke out in applause and cheers, giving Jodi a standing ovation for her amazing performance. As Jodi was looking at the wedding guests and newlyweds, Kristen's father pointed to the screen where the movie was playing. Kristen looked at it and got another shock. At first, Jodi didn't realize what was going on, but then she saw what the crowd was pointing at. A childhood photograph. The last surprise Kristen's father had prepared didn't leave one dry eye in the house. An old photograph that appeared on the screen, which made even Jodi say, oh, look at that. That's so precious," when she saw it. It turned out that Kristen's father managed to find an old photograph that was a real blast from the past. It showed Kristen's parents and Kristen herself as a little girl. She had short blonde hair, shaped as a bob, and was wearing a Little Mermaid shirt. This photo was at least 20 years old. How'd they pull it off? Of course, Kristen's father couldn't pull off this surprise all by himself. He had some help from his wife. Kristen's parents came to the idea of locating Jodi Benson together. Most of the time, it's quite impossible to get in touch with a celebrity. However, Kristen's parents were determined to give their daughter a surprise she would never forget. They went online and researched the people who could help them get in touch with Jodi. She didn't perform. The parents were convinced that it would be impossible to get Jodi to perform at the wedding. She said it herself that she had never performed at a non-family member's wedding before. However, they remained optimistic. They found some people who were connected to Jodi and explained how their daughter loved The Little Mermaid even now as an adult. They did all they could to stress how important this was to them and how much it would mean to their daughter. Sparing no expense. It wasn't cheap for hiring any wedding band, let alone a famous Disney singer. The couple was aware that they'd have to pay a pretty penny if they wanted Jodi to make an appearance. They really wanted Jodi to be at their daughter's wedding, so they made sure to let her know they had no issue in paying the woman any amount she wanted. However, it wasn't the paycheck that intrigued Jodi. It was their story. She was booked. Since the couple actually managed to book Jodi, they were beyond excited. They just wanted to tell their daughter the surprise they had planned. It was so hard to keep such a big secret to themselves. Even though they almost let the cat out of the bag a few times, they managed to keep it a secret. After all, they knew their daughter's surprise face on her wedding day would be worth the wait. In the end, their plan went perfectly, and they agreed that it was a good thing they managed to keep it quiet. Asking the questions. After Kristen calmed down from the shock, she went to her parents and asked them all sorts of questions about how they managed to pull off this kind of surprise. Even though they didn't tell her every little detail, they told her how hard it was to keep the secret from her. Kristen now understood why her father was so adamant about getting his time to speak. There was no reason for Kristen to worry, after all. The guest of honor. Even though Jodi didn't stay until the end of the reception, she did stick around for some time after her performance. She took some photos with the bride and groom, as well as with their families. Kristen was extremely grateful that Ariel herself made an appearance at her wedding. She was also delighted to find out that Jodi herself was a very sweet and friendly woman, which only made Kristen's vision of Ariel more ideal than before. A special thank you. Kristen couldn't put into words how much this gesture had meant to her. After the whole ordeal was finished, she made sure to tell her parents that this surprise was one she would never forget. She couldn't think of a better way to show her parents exactly how much this meant to her. They showed her they knew her well, and proved once again they would always be there to support her. In the end, Kristen got the Disney fairy tale wedding she'd always dreamed of. Party time. Kristen's parents were so nervous about the surprise for days before the actual wedding, and it was hard for them to relax. However, now that it was all over, they were able to enjoy the day. Jodi had made her appearance, and Kristen had the reaction they were hoping for. They could finally enjoy the party. They both took to the dance floor, celebrating their perfect gift and Kristen's big day. This wedding turned out